A very good afternoon to everyone. Now we are gathering here for the keynote address to be delivered by Dr. Adelaida, Upsalla University, Sweden. Before we start the keynote address by Dr. Adelaida, may I request Anisa and friends, students from the college, to present a song.
A wonderful afternoon to every one of you. The title of the song that we're going to sing is called Nathwe Kaminor, composed by David Wallam. Shibon Mithela.
Thank you very much, Adelaida. Sorry, thank you very much, Aniza. Right, rhymes. Anyway, for that beautiful song, melodious song. So without further delay, we have been waiting to hear from Dr. not Aniza, Adelaida, for her keynote address. So may I welcome Dr. Adelaida to the dais, please. Sir Prasenjit can join as well. And before we start, I request Professor Prasenjit Biswa to kindly brief the introduction.
Good afternoon to everyone here. We are going to have our second keynote address, and the address will be delivered by Dr. Adelaida Caballero Svensson, and I have this proud privilege of introducing her to all of you and her work as well. She holds a PhD in cultural anthropology from Upsalla University. Her work analyzes routinized forms of violence in relation to ethnic and identitarian discourses in authoritarian contexts of Africa, equatorial Africa. Her doctoral dissertation, shortchanged elderly women street vendors in Malabo, Equatorial Guinea, is an ethnographic exploration of what it means to be a woman and a person in an Afro-Bantu traditionalist dictatorship. Adelaida is also a published poet and the coordinator of Habitation 323, a pro bono initiative that offers literary workshops and basic editorial training to young Equatorial writers who struggle against the lack of freedom of press in the country. So on a very personal note, I met her first time 2 months back when I was on an Erasmus fellowship visit at University of Tallinn, and there was a conference going on of the World Semiotic Society where she presented her work, which was absolutely, I would say, it shakes you from within, because she discusses a phenomenon which I know traditionally goes by the name of cannibalism, but it's much more than that, the way power structures operate and bring out a dark facet of our public life in the context of Africa. Now in India, we know very little about Africa. We get to hear about a country called Gabon. We get to hear about Congo. We get to hear about a place like Malabo. And Gabon is much advertised as an investment destination among the Indian entrepreneurs. And much of the Indian entrepreneurs have reached there. Her work centers on Gabon, partly, and partly other parts of equatorial Africa. So I invite her to come over and deliver her keynote address. I hope all of us will enjoy it, and after that there could be a brief question-answer session. Please, I request you to come, please.
Can we start the PowerPoint, please? Hello, good afternoon. It's such an honor and a privilege to be here. How do I start with this? I would like to start issuing a warning. The subjects that I will be discussing are harsh, to say the least. I do not present any explicit images, but there is an audio clip which I have translated for you. And the audio clip and some of the stories that I will be presenting as well contain explicit language. There's a lot of violence in here, so just so you know, you are free to leave this beautiful hall at any moment, and I will not be offended in case you decide to do so. So I would like to start by introducing you to this remarkable place called Equatorial Guinea. I have a clicker. The clicker's not working. There you go. So Equatorial Guinea is this tiny country located between Cameroon and Gabon. I don't know if you can see it properly. There. The country comprises two geographical areas, one insular and one continental region. Malabo, the capital, sits in Bioko Island. And Bata is the largest city in the continental enclave of Rio Muni. I will be talking about events that have reportedly happened both in Malabo and in around the city of Bata in Rio Muni. Equatorial Guinea is the only Spanish-speaking country in Africa that has Spanish as their official language because they used to be a Spanish colony. I have studied Equatorial Guinea or topics related to Equatorial Guinea since 2013 when I conducted fieldwork in the country for the first time as part of the gathering of ethnographic evidence for my master's thesis. And then I went back a few years later to complete a full anthropological ethnographic fieldwork in Malabo for my doctoral dissertation. So throughout the years, I have kept a very close relationship with the country, with friends, informants, and I am I'm active in public discussions and debates that have to do with everything that goes on in the country. So all of the material that I'm going to be presenting to you has been collected throughout these 10 years of ethnographic endeavor in this place. Now, one of the things that called my attention from the very beginning was how people used to say that other people were evil. The title of this presentation is actually a quote from an interview that I conducted back in 2014. The person that I interviewed was telling me how everybody was so set on sabotaging each other. People hated each other. And he told me, I have always felt that there is a sky with an aura of pure evil surrounding Malabo and Bata. Now, there's something funky going on with it. It's probably the witches messing up with my clicker. There. So if you see the cities of Malabo and Bata, when he says that there is a sky with an aura of pure evil surrounding Malabo and Bata, what he basically meant was that this thing he called evil had taken over the entirety of the national territory. Now, The topic of evil in Equatorial Guinea is huge. It's so huge that it ended up taking an entire chapter of my doctoral dissertation. It's so big and encompasses all kinds of experiences of suffering, such as early deaths, tragic deaths, inequality, suffering, infant mortality, all kinds of experiences of suffering. People in Equatorial Guinea explain them in terms of evil. So the subject is huge. For the purpose of this presentation, all you need to know is that Equato-Guinean evil has two main components: envy and witchcraft. Envy in Equatorial Guinea is not a feeling, it's more like a practice, it's an activity. They use the expression to make envy. So to make envy means to sabotage people, to have bad behaviors, antisocial behaviors, to gossip maliciously, and ultimately to kill someone. Witchcraft is the product of envy making. But it transcends envy because witchcraft requires more than merely the actions of a single envious individual. Witchcraft requires the help of specialists. Let's call them witches or healers. In Equatorial Guinea, the word is witches, brujos. And these specialists are needed to give us medicines or to tell us what to do, how to do it, when, and so on. So witchcraft is a product of envy, but it is way more than envy because it transcends individual efforts and it requires the assistance of specialists, and above all, the practice of witchcraft in Equatorial Guinea requires a willingness, demands a willingness to harm others if that harm is going to help us achieve our own goals. A witch might ask us to kill a hen or a goat or a human being, depending on how massive the thing we want to get is. That will be the cost, and the cost is usually a sacrifice of some kind. Because witchcraft is such an embedded discourse in everyday life, people attribute all kinds of witchcraft beliefs and practices to politicians. Witchcraft is a means to attain power and money. So if you are a powerful person with a lot of money, people think, it's obvious that you have attained those things through witchcraft. The problem with this kind of thinking is that it's relatively democratic. So witchcraft is not limited to politicians. Anybody who is an envious person or an ambitious person can and does practice witchcraft. In this context, witchcraft is a democratic resource of sorts, and I will explain why later on. Democratic in the bad way, not in the good way. The problem with this endemic nature of witchcraft in this country is that because anybody can practice it, there's a lot of fear and a lot of suspicion and a lot of mistrust. People are always afraid that the neighbor or one's cousin or one's family member is going to try to take one for their own purposes. So there is a lot of tension and a lot of fear. And this climate has resulted in generalization of witchcraft beliefs and practices. So they are endemic, and otherwise everyday communal spaces, community spaces seem to have been taken over by witchcraft. Consider, for instance, what happened to my friend Julieta. Julieta is a journalist, and she's 40 years old. She grew up between Equatorial Guinea and Spain in different Catholic orphanages and boarding schools. So she grew up kind of detached from everyday life in Equatorial Guinea as it has deteriorated throughout the past 20 years. And when she was in the city of Bata, at one point, she visited a friend, and they were gonna go out for a dinner, and the friend told her, no, we cannot go to that specific place because in that place, if you want to, you can eat human flesh. And she didn't believe that at first, but then she got thinking, the tone in which her friend had said this, and who her friend was. Her friend was a man in his 60s who was not just a man from the village, no. This was a man who was trained as an anthropologist and had been educated in France, and he was a local and he knew the local language. This was not just anybody. So she told me, if a man like this tells you something like this, it's for a reason. So Julieta also understood that it was not very likely that her friend was lying, because she understood why Equato-Guineans might entertain the purpose of eating other human beings. That's a quote from Julieta. Considering the interest that the average Guineano has in achieving power, regardless of what it might take, I tell you, if somebody comes and tells him that if he eats human flesh, he will come to great power, he is going to eat human flesh. So rumors about bodies being found, mangled and hollowed out, stories about ritual vivisections, so dissections while the person is still alive, rituals perpetrated by initiated specialists, tales of tomb desecration carried out by drugged, zombified children who work on the ground for high-ranking witches, warnings about the existence of anthropophagous restaurants in and out of the big cities, like the story I just told you. All of these things, however incredible or even ridiculous they might sound to many of us, they are subjects of everyday talk in present-day Equatorial Guinea. My friends, my colleagues, my informants, they all agree that these stories, these rumors, they have always existed, always. But they also agree that they have proliferated in the past 20 years. Why? So the two general questions that I would like to pose in this presentation are the following. I don't think my clicker's working. General questions. Why have these stories proliferated? What processes, histories, developments, and effects are at play in their actualization? What are they really telling us? What would we find at the bottom of this collectively stirred narrative pot if we dare to look past the bloody details? Before I can try to answering these questions, I need to give you a little bit more background on Equatorial Guinea. Are you changing? Because my clicker is... You need to go forward. Yes, there. I'll just make you a sign with my hand when next. Cool? Yes, thank you. So this is a country overview. As you see, it's a very tiny country. It has a very small population, and the population is disputed. There is a dark legend about this. Some people say that local authorities or the national government actually blows up the population size in order to lower their GDP, make it appear lower than it actually is. And so there are 5 main ethnic groups, 4 of which are crushingly outnumbered by the Fang ethnic group, which occupies 85% of the total population. Next. These are people from Equatorial Guinea, regular, everyday Equato-Guinean individuals of nondescript ethnicities. They all look like this when you go there, and here they are at celebration. Next. So I want to talk to you about the Fang, because the Fang is the largest ethnic group, and as we will see later on, the state has become ethnified by the Fang, because the Fang have been the ones in power since independence from Spain in 1968. So the Fang, they're one of the largest ethnic groups in Central Africa. They have an enormous presence in Cameroon, Gabon, Equatorial Guinea, and Congo, Brazzaville. They are considered a warrior culture with a very strong religious life world. And the religious life world encompasses practices such as animism, spiritism, ancestor worship. The ancestor worship is usually carried out through bone relics known as bieri. They are little wooden statues that keep fragments of cranial bones of deceased ancestors. And of course, witchcraft. So these are some of Fang men at the wedding. I didn't want to bring any picture of the Fang, you know, in the colonial depiction of wearing straw skirts and all that. These are regular Fang men at a celebration. Next. The Fang, the core of the Fang religious life world, and witchcraft in particular, is the belief in the Evu. The Evu is a living organism believed to be either bacterial or reptilian, and the Evu lives in the human belly. You can be born with the Evu, or you can acquire it through certain rituals of initiation. And the Evu eats only blood and human flesh. Now, this thing called the Evu is believed to be the seat of power for the Fang witch, whose name is, or is known as Nem. If you are a Fang witch, if you are a Nem, and you have your Evu, and you have to maintain your power, you need to feed your Evu blood and human flesh. That is the rationale behind this belief in the Evu. So, anthropophagy, or the practice of eating other human beings, is in Fang religious thought the most radical expression of witchcraft. Because the Evu, your Evu, only eats blood and human flesh. The more power you want to have, the more you have to feed your Evu, and that is a rationale behind the whole thing. Now, this wakes a lot of fear among people, and for a good reason. Equato-Guinean Fang anthropologist Joaquin Mbananchama believes that the aspect that undoubtedly generates the most fear among the Fang regarding the existence of the Evu and witchcraft is cannibalism. And cannibalism wakes even more fear than witchcraft because it is very real. This comes from an anthropologist who also happens to be a native Fang man. People's belief in the Evu, however, is not the only strong basis or potential basis for contemporary practices of anthropophagy or cannibalism. Besides the Evu, there is this religion called Buti. Buti is an Afro-Christian syncretic religion that originated in Gabon in the early 1800s. By syncretic religion, I mean that it's a mixture of a bunch of things. It's a mixture of Christianity with animism and spiritism and all these indigenous religions that were there before the missionaries came. So the Buti is this kind of syncretic religion. It's a mixture of many things. It's very popular in Gabon, Cameroon, Congo, Zaire, and of course Equatorial Guinea. It's a decentralized movement, which means it is carried on by independent sects headed by a bishop. That's a Buti bishop. And is of course very popular among the Fang. I will not go into that discussion in this presentation, but all you need to know is that the Buti was or constituted a form of anti-colonial resistance by means of affirming Fang nationalistic identities before independence. So it's huge, it's very important, Buti. There you have a picture of a common Buti ceremony with a bishop officiating. You see the woman in green is wearing kind of a police hat, an old hat, and that is, she's allegedly channeling the spirit of the hat owner. So there's elements of spiritism very, very apparent in this photo. So the Buti, people who partake in Buti gain revelation through the consumption of a plant known as iboga. Iboga is a hallucinogenic plant, so this is a psychedelic religion. When you become initiated, an initiation happens between the ages of 8 and 10. These girls you see in the picture, they are either going to be initiated or they are going to partake in a Buti ceremony. Initiation takes place, or it starts with a massive intake of this plant, iboga. And what iboga is supposed to do is that it's supposed to put your physical body to sleep. You enter in a kind of coma, and you're supposed to have a lot of experiences. You will see the spiritual world. You will have a lot of experiences with ancestors, with God. That is the initiation of Buti. The first intake is a massive intake, and then every time there is a mass, which there are nightly masses, probably once a week depending on each sect, you might take a little bit more of iboga as if it were communion. That is their equivalent to communion. Another thing that is important to note about Buti religion in relation to the Fang is that Buti foundational myths also feature anthropophagy. In the Buti foundational myth, it is a woman that goes, her husband dies and she goes to try to find his body, and she doesn't find his body, and the body is lost for a very long time, and then she finds the bones and she keeps the bones, but she has already remarried, she married someone else. At the end of the story, in order for the woman's new husband to become initiated and see the spirits that she's seeing, he has to sacrifice her and eat her together with plants, which is the iboga. So the Buti has anthropophagy and ritual human sacrifice embedded in its foundational myths. Now they say that today, of course, no, we don't do that anymore. Now we only kill chickens and goats. In our rituals, we have replaced human blood with the blood of chickens and goats, and so that's what we do. And the dominant discourse on this regard is that cannibalism in general, and Buti/Fang cannibalism in particular, has always been a colonial invention. It was the French and the Spaniards who invented the stereotype of the black cannibal savage man in order to justify colonization and evangelization and whatnot. That is a common discourse right now. I will not problematize the discourse, although it's a very problematic discourse in this presentation, but that is the dominant doxa. And when new allegations of human sacrifice and cannibalism arise, Buti practicants and Buti practitioners and other people, especially white American and European Middle-aged men who go there on religious tourism, they get really upset and they say that no, these allegations on cannibalism is just, they are slander campaigns carried out by the Catholics. That's what they say. Next. So these are two Gabonese children who have been attired for their Buti initiation. And I don't know if you remember early on when I tell you about the stories that usually circulate in these places. People believe that zombified children go at night to the cemeteries working for the witches and harvesting bones and stuff from the deceased. They refer to these types of children. Perhaps they don't look like this. This is their ceremonial attire. But the thought behind that children are zombified, and they do these kinds of things for the witches, is that the consumption of iboga, the hallucinogenic plant, people believe by the time, because you get initiated at 8, by the time you turn 18, your brain is completely scrambled, your will is gone. And so, because you have grown up drugged in such a strong religious environment, your will has been now sort of merged with the will of the person or the adult who has been drugging you your entire life, and this is usually priests and Mbuti practitioners, including family members, I must say. So, colonial records. There are a bunch of colonial records. The earliest allegations of fan cannibalism go all the way back to the mid-1800s, 50 years or so after Buti starts kind of taking off. And the colonial records end, of course, in the mid-1900s, right before independence. In these early allegations, already either officials or the accused themselves connect the issue of anthropophagy either to beliefs in the Evu or to the presence of Buti sects. In French Cameroon, the Penal Code of 1944 actually included 2 articles penalizing anthropophagy. But in Spanish Guinea, there was no real legislation. They used to, well, there was no real legislation, but this did not mean that these cases did not happen. And people were being tried and sentenced for crimes related to cannibalism, such as poisoning, murder, corpse desecration, tomb desecration, so all these other things that were involved in the same practice. Colonial officials were pretty realistic about the whole thing, and they understood that if the presence of these practices is still going on, it is because, quote, colonization is a light superficial layer covering the natives' atavistic tendencies, which are prone to reappear in any favorable moment. This was written in 1951. That favorable moment came with independence in 1968. So Equatorial Guinea gained its independence from Spain in 1968. The political culture that it inherited from the metropolis was Francoism. Spain was under the control of General Francisco Franco. It was a traditionalist, national Catholic, totalitarian state. And this is the political culture that the new nation inherited. The first president was Francisco Macias. He was a self-proclaimed Pan-Africanist. He was an ethnic Fang. He became a traditionalist autocrat and created, and this is very important to understand what's going on right now, he created a culture of denunciation. People were rewarded with jobs within public administration every time they accused someone of being a political dissident. So if you accuse your uncle of being a dissident and your uncle got taken to jail, you would be rewarded. People started, of course, denouncing everybody. And this culture of denunciation also in the collective political imagination created this kind of denunciation became a form of legitimate symbolic sacrifice. You sacrificed your family member to the state in order to get a job within the state. And this went on for about 11 years, which is what the Macias dictatorship lasted. This is the man, one of his famous titles, Satan's envoy, son of Lucifer and president of the witches. He was a known Buti practitioner. His father had been a Buti priest. And it is rumored that his father actually sacrificed his youngest son, so President Macias' brother, in order to achieve power. Now, similar rumors have been going on for many, many decades about him as well. And he supposedly also kept a casual anthropophagus diet. He had an execution method for this, allegedly. The method was called awumiliga. And awumiliga means to die in the drum. So rumor has it that he used to have many drums, those old oil drums, at his place in a town called Nsagayong. And the execution method was that the drums would get filled with water, and then he would put the people in and close the lid to have them drown. So this was a torture and an execution method. The catch is, he wouldn't get rid of the corpses. The corpses would be let to ferment in these drums. And then every time he had to have a ritual meal, he would order for one of the drums to be open, and he would harvest his protein from there. That's one of the stories that circulate about Macias. And he had a very big project of Africanization. He was an anti-West. Everything Western was banned. Books banned, public education banned, Christianity banned. Teachers, priests, everyone was just prosecuted, and everybody ended up fleeing the country. It says that up to 1/3 of the population was either killed or exiled during President Macias' reign. And part of this project of Africanization was the revival of indigenous Fang religion, which, as you have seen, includes beliefs in the Evu and aspects of the Buti religion. Of course, all this chaos and violence ended up, like his process of Africanization ended up provoking the collapse of the state. The state collapsed. And upon this collapse, he was eventually overthrown by coup d'etat by his own nephew, who is President Teodoro Obiangema, who's still president today. So when he overthrew President Macias in 1979, he had gone up, as the case is in Gabon right now, as a military government, a military council. But eventually he took over and he became president, and they have been having elections, and he has been re-elected like 6 times. So he has been in power for 44 years. And right now, this country, this man is the longest serving president anywhere in the world. He is also a self-proclaimed Pan-Africanist, also an ethnic Fang, a traditionalist autocrat, has one-party rule, and interestingly enough, unlike Macias, he has tried to sell the image of himself as a benevolent dictator. He thinks that democracy equals infrastructural development. So the country looks very nice in the big cities, at least in the urban centers. And the rationale behind this is that, of course, everybody wants water. Of course, everybody wants roads. And that to him means he's a democratic leader. He is known as the great owl, El Gran Búho. He is also a known Buti practitioner. He is a known occultism enthusiast who flies witches and gurus and all kinds of specialists from all over the world. They come to Guinea and they eat with him, and he lets himself be seen on television surrounded by these people, also, as we will see later on, as a means to exert fear on the people. In a country full of witches, he is the witchest of them all, kind of. His rule has been defined or called as Franco-African neo-primitivism because of this revival of customary Fang institutions and myths and beliefs in witchcraft, but also because it is reported that overtly ritual crimes, like people start seeing how mutilated bodies appear in the streets. This starts happening during the 1980s. during the first decade of his rule. This is a time in which the state is trying to consolidate itself, get itself together again after the first dictatorship, and so there's a lot of repression. This is a period when totalitarianism actually consolidates itself in the country. So known torturers, according to journalist Joaquin Bomio Bateng, known torturers start conducting these types of overtly ritual crimes and leaving the bodies all over the place so that people can see them. These Franco-African neo-primitivism and these practices that Bomio Bateng attributes to Obiang and his reign is symptomatic of larger process of retraditionalization that started with Macias and Africanization. So even though Macias was ousted, his political culture of mistrust, denunciation, deceit, and violence carried on throughout the Obiang years, and is still going on. And we're gonna get to how it manifests today. So what this process of retraditionalization meant was basically the revival of uncustomary institutions, kinship ideology, clientelism, patronage, and witchcraft beliefs, which throughout 40 years, and when taken to the context of the state, not the village, not the clan, the state has turned into nepotism, corruption, and occultism, and the belief that power equals wealth, human sacrifices. So you see, things that might be values in a definite ethnic community can turn into something very different and very bad when taken to the context of state and its institutions. And this is key to a lot of the discussions that we have been having in this conference. This situation, okay, these new equations, has put an enormous pressure on the state, weakening the institutions. Many commentators on Equatorial Guinea suggest that the country was always at the brink of drowning until something actually happened that ended up being like a life jacket to the regime. They found oil. So they discovered oil in the mid-1990s, which of course attracted a lot of American interests and made the country a super rich petrostate because it's tiny and it has a very small population. So there's a lot of money. The problem is that the money stays in the pockets of the ruling family and their friends and acquaintances and their clan. That money of the oil, national natural resources, don't ever leave the pockets of the Esangi clan. So today, Equatorial Guinea is one of the wealthiest nations in the world if one takes their GDP in consideration. But if one goes there, sees that it's not very developed at all. And so there is this paradox that has increased a lot of economic inequalities, and with that, an exacerbation of violence. The current state of affairs, in principle, Equatorial Guinea is a democratic republic. In practice, it is a dynastic kleptocracy, and I say dynastic because President Macias was from the Esangi clan, President Teodoro Biangema is from the Esangi clan, and it is expected that his son from the Esangi clan is going to take over once he dies. Everybody is kind of ready for that to happen. As I mentioned already, he's the longest serving ruler as of this year, and his government is infamous for the systematic violations of human rights, intimidation, threats, beatings, arbitrary arrest, torture to extract confessions, suspicious deaths, and a long list of etceteras. So the general premise for the material that I'm going to show to you now is that, as I have argued in my doctoral dissertation, which is that Equatoguineans talk about evil, envy, witchcraft, communicates political uncertainty, inequality, injustice, as well as experiences of structural and direct violence. Here, on this occasion, for this presentation, I would like to suggest that their talk about cannibalism addresses both a knowledge and a fear born from the knowledge that in order to make it in retraditionalized politics, ambitious individuals have to eat. I'm going to show you some of the cases now. Again, if at any moment you feel like this is too much and you want to leave, I will not get offended. So, Malabo, 22nd of May, 2023. Local authorities discovered a dead body in a half-built house nearby populous Semu market. The deceased, a 48-year-old ethnic Bubi man, another ethnic group, worked at the market helping customers transport groceries in his wheelbarrow. According to his wife, the deceased had been missing for 3 days, from Friday morning to Monday evening. Determining a possible cause of death on site was impossible, as the body had been found in an advanced state of decomposition. An online newspaper based in Spain, however, offered a plausible theory. It reported that, quote, according to eyewitnesses, everything seems to point to a homicide since certain parts of the body were missing. As you can probably imagine, every time a mutilated body is found, such as this one, people's belief that politicians are cannibals finds confirmation. This belief goes unchallenged because dead bodies in Equatorial Guinea cannot really tell exactly what happened to them. Authorities do not perform autopsies, nor do families demand them, fearing that their loved one's heart, brains, or genitals would be removed for use in witchcraft or indeed for consumption in practices of ritual anthropophagy. Answers to the questions that such bodies pose tend to come from survivors. This is from individuals who, by their own account, have been close to being eaten, but managed to escape somehow. Given the general state of fear in which Equatoguineans live, survivors' testimonies are usually recorded and conveyed by a third party, a shocked bystander, an outspoken critic who lives abroad. And these stories are feverishly shared on social media to warn others. One such a testimony circulated in late 2022. A taxi driver recorded a lengthy WhatsApp voice clip telling the story of a woman he supposedly found running in the middle of the highway by kilometer 10 in the outskirts of the city of Bata. According to the taxi driver, the woman owned a little bar that the fat ones, or los gordos in Spanish, this is a nickname that people have for politicians, we're usually kind of fat. One of the fat ones was a frequent customer of her bar, and he had seen her, and he liked her, and he thought that she had what people refer to as very high traditional energies. So there was something about this woman, her charisma, her success in the business, anything that called the attention of this fat one, this big man. And so he decided that he wanted to take those energies for himself and send someone to kill her. The assassin managed to kidnap the woman, but as he drove with her out of the city, he supposedly was overcome by the power that the woman exuded. The man stopped the vehicle and confessed his plans to his intended victim. Impersonating the would-be assassin, the taxi driver recounted the words as the man had allegedly spoken them. Don't open your bar anymore because these people want your flesh, these people want your blood, these people want to eat you. They have sent me to kill you, but I just can't do it. The man let the woman escape. She ran in desperation down the highway by kilometer 10, where the taxi driver found her and picked her up. Crying and still in a panic, the woman managed to tell the taxi driver what just happened. The driver, after dropping the woman somewhere safe, recorded the voice clip and sent it to his family. And the family spread it, warning, especially women, to be careful with the kinds of men that they went around with. So a few months after this incident reportedly happened in the city of Bata, so in the continental region, another testimony circulated about an even more disturbing event in the city of Malabo, the capital. This particular story circulated in early 2023. It was made viral by an Equatorial woman who admitted to having been, at one point in her life, part of the alleged coterie of witches who run the state. So the woman who tells this story, she acknowledges that she was once part of it. She is now exiled, living in Spain, has turned against everything she has done before, and she was the conveyor of this story. The girls whose story she conveyed had contacted her, she said, asking that she warn others, especially women, about what had happened to them. The story goes as follows. One weekend in early 2023, two women in their early 20s went to a club in Malabo. Two handsome, well-off men in their mid-30s approached them. After a couple of hours dancing and splurging on expensive drinks, the men asked the women whether they would be interested in taking the party to a patio they had near Potao, close to a place known as Sacribafang, approximately 10 kilometers northwest of Malabo. The women agreed to go with the men. Each one of them got into one of the men's high-end vehicles, and off they rolled out of the city and into the thick darkness that enrobes the countryside in Bioko Island. The patio was located far from the main road, deep in the forest. The two women and their hosts entered the gates in their vehicles. An unusually tall Guineano man was waiting for them inside. The two well-to-do younger men started arguing with the tall man in French, completely oblivious to the fact that one of the women was half Gabonese and could understand everything that they were saying. The tall man told the younger men that he had been clear regarding his salary, that his fee was 7 million CFA francs per head, which is equivalent to roughly $11,500. The tall man was upset that his clients were now offering 6 million francs instead. The younger men had apparently spent too much money at the club and had paid part of the bill using some of the cash they had promised the tall man in exchange for his services. The tall man told his clients that the work he did required a great deal of courage, that if he was able to do such a job, it was because he had sold his soul, and that being so, the least he expected was to be paid in full. The man advised his clients to go back to the city and get the rest of the money. He promised to keep watch on the girls until they returned. The men agreed to go back to Malabo. They told their female guests that they had to go back to the club to pick something that they had forgotten. The men got into one of the vehicles, which was supposedly a rather distinctive yellow Hummer, and left. Let me remind you, this is a very tiny place. Everybody knows what everyone else drives. So there's not a lot of privacy or anonymity in these kinds of stories. Once her hosts were gone, the half Gabonese woman broke out in a panic. She yelled at her friend that the men had taken them there to be killed. The woman started crying, wailing, lamenting her fate, calling the name of her father aloud. Upon hearing the name of the woman's father, the tall man looked shocked. He approached her and asked her again who her father was. The woman repeated the name of her father, telling the name of his natal village too. The tall man became scared. He told the girl that if indeed she was her father's daughter, then she should know what kind of work he did, because her father was among those who had prepared him in Gabon. The girl did not know what to say. The man dragged a medium-sized blue bucket containing a dark liquid, To the girl, it looked like a mixture of wine and blood. The man told her that if he drank 2 glasses of that mixture, they could bring his own mother in, he said, and he would still carve her up like an animal. Impersonating the tall man as he supposedly had spoken to the girls, the story conveyor went. Luckily, the boys did not bring my pay in full. Had they done so, you and I never would have exchanged a word, because as soon as someone comes into this patio and I'm given my money, I drink what I drink and I get to work. I don't kill women, I carve them up. I cut their breasts, their vagina, their tongue, their eyes. I do it you being alive. You die of pain, of shock, of blood loss. Since you came into the patio, I haven't dared to drink the substance. Luckily, these boys did not bring the money in full. I know your father well, and I don't want any problems with him, so the only thing that I can do right now is tell you to leave. According to the story, the tall man instructed the women to leave the country because now that they knew what the 2 younger big men were up to, the men would not stop looking for them. The women made their way on foot back to Malabo, bought 2 plane tickets to Bata, and from Bata they drove to Gabon. It was from Gabon that they had contacted the woman in Spain, asking her to tell their story. The woman said, so that the men could not take anyone else. Now, these 2 stories, while disturbing, they are not nearly as crude as a testimony that circulated in relation to the alleged disappearance of a man whom people call Ondo Martin. I have prepared a static video of this audio. There is no images. The image is just a photo of the jungle. But the sound, the audio, is a real clip that circulated. The man starts talking in Spanish and then switches to Fang. And the audio lasts about 3 minutes. So I have prepared this video and I have made subtitles, translation in English. This is the roughest part of the whole presentation, so if you think this might be too much for you, once again, you can leave and I will not be offended.
Pues yo no estuve al corriente de este caso, ¿no? Vale, hasta cierto punto sabía, vayam. Pero el punto más que voy a decir, vamos a de verdad que me vayam no man morachuye nivelin. O sea, Ondo Martín, una vez que los supuestos asesinos, es decir, los asesinos le mataron, ya no va a huir, va a calir, va a calir yo. Ano bakal ne yo bi nam enam diuko bakal ne yo ba mane swarbito benga bene be su propio hermano, padre y madre a tele salayo sala vamos tu abalot ne ya va a controlar si alguien venía a controlar y a ver vigilante. Eborba benga bebe es afanite salam fangana bebe ya ne benga man be bekba kenya nyong enam henya nyong abo bakba cuando tenían clientes, entre ellos Marabuno muchos conocen un tal llamado Chico Pablo, el famoso de Enzor. Carmabuni ambe el cliente principal ne nyanga nyafanga kus bo cliente ba fa ba manu twive bo manu twabu ne ba fa ba ngakus yo bo manakus hasta me enteró que vino un gabonés desde Gabón ne a kum fozukus e de bozene on no ligiyan bo yo bo tuayo no tan nyane realmente un hombre a caro de ba na ba le go wa yi okay de ba to no ba jesite porque el gabonés no caro gabonés es el tan Babe Diasre, et ba Jewasite. ¿Qué pasa? Ellos van a poner, bioma boom, la parte, vale, todo es horrible, pero la más de que mata, bioma boom, un guanea lumbalwe, elas mina femina llame algunos mungwana lumbalu elas enyanga tomiye amano bawisak asoevu bayama mvete de bengaji. Señores, bado na bengaji anu wawajif chicharo no yame mana kanga la brasato bengaji biomabum bemano kuana sisai biomabum bi bengaji. Esta parte es de me vayam e de me vas yemanu murabi name yama kobna ya ne boba wogma benga boyam bal jamte e be ke benga bal jamte nama krowa masawa. Hasta ya hay videos, me ven videos en Boloma de va. No se desarrolla todo, pero al menos me han dado algo. Any for come able for wifi in the Jumad Mavan bel datos móviles me va a recargar wifi al final de este mes.
Can we go back to the presentation, please? How are you? This is the kind of material that I work with. So you can imagine how desensitized I am. But when I get to present material like this in front of people and I see people's reactions and sighs, it gets back to me all over again. Anyway, now I'm gonna have a very brief discussion with regards to the material that I have presented and the background that I have given you. It's politics and the occult in a retraditionalized state. So the theoretical framework that I use as an anthropologist to deal with these kinds of stories and materials is the concept of neo-cannibalism, as developed by American anthropologist Nancy Shepard Hughes. And she defines neo-cannibalism very broadly as the biomedical abuse and plunder of dead bodies with the complicity and collaboration of militarized states. Nancy Shepard Hughes has conducted extensive ethnographic fieldwork in many settings, and some of the cases on which she builds for this concept are, for example, desecration of dead bodies of Palestinian enemies in a militarized national forensic lab in Israel, political ethnic conflict and cannibalistic violence against Serbs in a transit detention camp in Kosovo, and the harvesting of tissues and solid organs from black and colored bodies in the state police mortuary in Cape Town during the anti-apartheid struggles. This is a very important case, the Cape Town case, because it has a very strong similarity to the Equato-Guinean case. In the Cape Town case, rumors started circulating about ritual murders for human body parts for sale to deviant practitioners of traditional medicine called sangomas and inyangas, some of whom use body parts in covert rituals of magical increase to promote the wealth, strength, business interest, political power, property health, and sexual potency of their clients. Now, at first, Shepard Hughes did not give a lot of credence to these rumors. She interpreted them as symbolic expressions of the cumulative experiences of poverty, chronic want, labor exploitation, political oppression, and deadly deaths. Over the years, however, and the more and more cases that she has gotten to study all over the world, she has changed her mind. So now she interprets such rumors, or she believes that such rumors are at the very least metaphorically true, since they witness the ontological insecurity of classes of people to whom almost anything could be done, reflecting everyday threats to bodily security, urban violence, police terror, summary executions, and body mutilation, all of which were daily occurrences. Now, in contemporary Equatorial Guinea, as you have seen and as I have mentioned, the background of everyday life is everyday violence. And of course, such violence derives to a significant extent from discourses on Afro-Bantu traditionalism. as retraditionalization has merged state politics and wealth with Fang occult practices built on beliefs such as that of the human flesh-eating Evu, a semantic entanglement between politics, money, and ritual killings as a pathway to success has taken root in the collective imagination, reaffirming in turn the notion of eating as Equatoguineans understand it today. Eating in the Equatoguinean context, and in Cameroon and in Gabon, refers to resource accumulation, fattening, getting fat, as much as it does to the occult forces that people must master in order to exert power over others. So, if a big belly signifies wealth, it follows that to eat means to accumulate, exploit, defeat, attack, or kill with witchcraft. Remember, we are talking about very corrupt post-colonial African states. So wealth is not dependent on how good you are at what you do. Wealth is dependent on how high you can climb up the state ladder. And remember that the state is retraditionalized by Fang men. So if we want to make it in the political world of Fang men, you have to play by the rules of power of Fang men, which just happen to be witchcraft and related practices. So remember there also was a discovery of oil. Scholars of Africa, a lot of them, have pointed to the fact that when there is an increase in wealth, and this increase in wealth is combined with an exacerbation of economic inequalities, witchcraft beliefs and accusations tends to escalate. So the more money there is, and the more economic inequalities there are, the more that witchcraft proliferates, because the ones on top want to keep themselves there and the ones below want to climb up. And the way to do that is through magical occultist practices. And of course, in the case of Equatorial Guinea, the discovery of oil in the 1990s did just that, and this is exactly why stories have proliferated in the past 20 years, since the discovery of oil. Within President Obiangema's traditionalist autocracy, more resources mean higher stakes. Lateral struggles amongst aspiring politicians intensify, and the need to demand constant proofs of loyalty from one's subordinates arises. But oil also means the presence of American interests in Equatorial Guinea, and this has put a lot of international attention in this country in relation to violations of human rights and whatnot. So as a reaction to this unwanted international attention that oil has brought, the Equatoguinean government retreats into privacy. It shuts down. And of course, this privacy, state privacy, is interpreted as secrecy. Why do they do this? Like, okay, I have explained about neo-cannibalism and how the oil exacerbated inequalities and power and the occult and whatnot, but okay, so this makes sense to me, at least, and hopefully to you too. But how do they rationalize this? Throughout my 10 years working in issues related to Equatorial Guinea, I have had the opportunity to work close by middle-ranking politicians. And every time a discussion about these kinds of things emerges, or not these things, but like corruption, for instance, when the issue of corruption emerges, they immediately invoke the sovereignty rationale. Equatorial Guinea is a sovereign nation. It is entitled to exert her own African proper forms of governance because they are a free state. And that's all true. But in light of retraditionalization, what do these African proper forms of governance mean? Remember, retraditionalization entailed the revival of Fang customary institutions, clientelism, witchcraft beliefs, and kinship ideology. So if these are the tenets of retraditionalization, and if Equatorial Guinea is entitled to exert its own African proper forms of governance, it follows that such African proper forms of governance are, in fact, these things that relate to witchcraft, to nepotism, to clientelism, patronage, and so on. So the idea, right, that big men could climb the ranks by engaging in occult practices in this context of the retraditionalized state is hardly an absurdity. We need to take these rumors seriously, which most anthropologists have been unwilling to do because they think that they're folktales or they don't want to put their careers on the line. But this is a background, and according to the background and the context, it makes perfect sense. So we need to start paying attention to these kinds of things. And the fact that it's not, so it is not surprising. And it is not surprising, especially if one considers the motives that people attribute to these fat ones. Ordinary motives, for example, aspiring politicians sacrifice people as proofs of loyalty. Their bosses demanded also to obliterate the men's morals. Ambitious people bewitch their enemies by poisoning them, which is, of course, an effective strategy to eliminate competitors. The fat ones buy, cook, and eat human body parts to appropriate the dead person's talents, charisma, and strength, which they need to boost their own power and influence over others. So these motives are very banal, right? They are like everyday motives for political assassinations all around the world. But in the Equatoguinean context, the fact that these motives are banal and that people keep telling these stories every day, every single day, it does not mean that they don't have any negative impacts or effects in Equatoguinean society. So again, to quote FANG anthropologist Joaquin Bananchama, witchcraft leads to alienation since it assumes that those who are poor or underdeveloped during the day can be developed at night. But no one is happy in our society with the current underdevelopment that we experience during the day just so that we can live good at night. And this was written in 2004, almost 20 years ago. A couple of months ago, a new breed of meme emerged from social media of Equatoguinean user base. These are the memes. The text reads, Nzoksomo in the witchcraft. Nzoksomo is a town. And I can tell you, it does not look like this at all. It looks like the exact opposite. The other meme, Ebibeyin in witchcraft after midnight. Ebibeyin, I can tell you, it does not look like that at all. So these are memes that make fun of this dualism between the visible world during the day, underdeveloped, dirty, and the invisible world that becomes visible at night, the world of the witches, where Equatorial Guinea is a world power, right? So this is a kind of alienation that Banatama has warned about since 20 years ago. So there's this thing with alienation, right? It doesn't matter that we are kind of underdeveloped by day if we are really a world power at night. So they think. But there is something else besides alienation, which is worse. Again, Banatama says that a person dominated by fear is a stunned person. Our development will not be possible for as long as man remains stunned by the Ebu. And this is a quote from an informant who back in 2014 explained to me the genealogical and regional peculiarities of occult practices in the country. The man, who was a Fang man in his mid-60s, told me that it is said that those men from Mongomo is a village of the president and his clan, employ especially black magic, witchcraft. That's what they are so feared. I think that they also feed such beliefs because people are very afraid. So witchcraft, in the eyes of the old man, was an aid in the encroachment of Ngemist totalitarianism. How exactly? In Fang traditional thought, ethnic Fang traditional thought, there are three operative human qualities: intelligence, to understand reality as it is; will, to seek what is good; and memory, to learn, remember, and act in consequence. Being afraid in Fang is akowong, from the verb akwang, to get sick, and wong, which is fear. So literally, to be fearful, to fear, translates in Fang as being sick with fear. And according to Banantama, a person who is sick with fear is a person who sees her three operational qualities impaired. So a person who is sick with fear is an ontologically sick person, is a person who cannot understand things as they are, they cannot seek the good, they cannot learn, remember, nor act in consequence. Strangely enough, or not strangely enough, perhaps expectedly enough, the verb akoan, to get sick, also contains a radical ko, which means nothingness, annulment. So a person who is sick with fear, or nkowong, is also an annulled person. It stops existing as a person. A person who has her qualitative, her operational qualities impaired is an annulled person. In this context, fear, the fear of witchcraft, annuls the human person by foreclosing the exercise of her operative qualities, thwarting human flourishing and paralyzing social development. In conclusion, in contemporary Equatorial Guinea, harassment and censorship mix with arbitrary arrests, torture, and suspicious or untimely deaths. Such deaths are painted across a canvas of persistent rumors about poisonings and cannibalism by members of the state. These types of violence are by no means exclusive to Equatorial Guinea, but the country's cultural particularities, the Fang ethnic particularities, have certainly determined their manifestations. As retraditionalization has merged state politics and wealth with the occult, politicians have become human predators. In the world of witchcraft, the possibility of being dehumanized, violated, depleted, and consumed by another ruler or relative is real. And Equato-Guinean witches, like the Zambian witches, about whom anthropologist Sonia Silva writes about, of course appear in people's stories as characters who have exited morality and have become human predators. So together with the fear of witchcraft and the context of the wealth brought by oil, there's a context of deep political uncertainty. As political instability in the country increases with the prospect of an impending transition from President Teodoro Obiang to his eldest son and current Vice President Teodoro Obiang Mange, stories about human sacrifice and cannibalism proliferate. People perceive the threat of being eaten, as continuously carried out by powerful big men who seek to climb the ranks or to maintain their position by acting upon traditional Fang occult power orders. It is not a coincidence, in case I haven't mentioned this before, that reports of mutilated bodies actually increase during election season. Mothers warn their kids to not leave the house after a certain hour because it's election season and everybody knows that mutilated bodies are gonna start to appear. In sum, Equato-Guineans talk about cannibalism is symptomatic of a collectively embodied knowledge. People's knowledge of their own vulnerability at the hands of those who personify the state and its potential for violence. Mutilated bodies are material signifiers of the violence that seeps through the retraditionalized state. In light of the reoccurrence with which such signifiers appear in the streets, fan cannibalism for ritual or political ends is experienced as very real. Equatoguineans, men and women, and particularly women and children, coexist every day with the risk of becoming, for lack of a better term, fodder for the belly of big men. Thank you.
So you have heard probably this breathtaking presentation, I must say, which actually brought out something very new to us. It is what is exactly happening in Africa, in certain parts of Africa at this moment. And one can see a kind of a connection here between traditional culture and the way statecraft uses a traditional culture. The traditional culture, in the case of Equatorial Africa, bases itself on creating what she has called a kind of a sickness of fear, you know. And fear makes one completely paralyzed, and one can be subjected to a kind of treatment where, you know, one is vulnerable. So this is something that comes out of it, and also something that, you know, we should look at this anthropological context. You know, we can contextualize it in many ways. We can see many things that are similar. Of course, I don't want to name those things, and many things are dissimilar, you see. So traditionalization in a certain way affects, I mean, we have talked about witchcraft in Assam. There is a village called Mayong, where you have all these practices which are occult practices, practices that start with offering of the human blood, you know. And it's not something that is rare in the case of Northeast. I have myself done a book on evil. You can take a look at that book as well, how it happens and how these things are ritualized. So this is all before you. Any comment, question, welcome. And Adelaida is here to answer all your questions, you know. She is very much interested to answer questions if there are, you know, any question that is there. Maybe about 15 minutes or so, Manba? 15 minutes, yeah. Okay, please. Now the floor is yours.
Nobody has any questions, comments? Yes? Wait, they're going to give you a microphone.
Hello, ma'am. Thank you so much for that presentation. I mean, I have no words to say. Just wow, because we never really thought that, you know, with modernity and all that, we never really knew, like you said, no? You look poor, you look rich, and the nightlife is, you know, something else. I mean, I have no questions to ask, but just to appreciate what you've been doing. Very much interested in whatever you're doing, because you brought in the essence of polity and then tradition, and how these two go hand in hand, and it's getting worse, in fact, day by day. Thank you so much. And ma'am, I would request if you can share your work, your books or something. I would be interested to read. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Back there.
Good evening, Dr. Adelaida.
Yes?
A pleasure meeting you since day one. Well, the discussion from the very first day. After seeing your presentation, firstly I would like to applaud you for the kind of work. From your presentation, I could get 2, 3, 4, 5 actually key points. you talk about the concept of tradition, you talked about the concept of culture, you've talked about the concept of state, and you've also talked about the concept of governance. Firstly, from your research paper, like you said, it's constituted, or rather strictly located, in African Guinea. Well, I think it's a traditional community, firstly. Yes, with traditional communities, you maintain a sense of identity or culture. And with time, with modernity, like you said, it's a psychedelic religion, or psychedelic use of quote-unquote psychedelic drug, hallucinations, whereby they've been indoctrinated since the time when they were small, up till 18 years. First question, how do people who have been indoctrinated, or rather trained, or rather, I would use the word indoctrinated, is it possible for people to get out of that chain, out of that system? Firstly. Secondly.
Wait, let me answer that, because then I forget.
Okay, sure.
Well, first of all, people, if you remember the talk that Professor, what's his name? Kukati. Yes. He was, I had a discussion with him later on during lunch. And I told him, everything you have said about tradition and the need to preserve cultural ethnic identities and so on is all true, and it was really good, as long as the ethnic roots, like the beliefs, the mythologies, are life-affirming instead of life-destroying. Because in the place that I study, these mythologies are to a great extent life-destroying, and we are seeing the consequences. So I guess the point that I'm trying to make, I'm really tired, is that this, when I told the professor this, he told me, if it is so in that place, it's because they have forgotten what their true tradition is. And then we started talking about whether or not there exists this sort of fake, false ethnic consciousness, like Fanonian concept. Can the Fang of Equatorial Guinea have a false ethnic conscience in the sense that what they believe now is tradition is really not? There is a lot of research done in all parts of Africa that kind of supports this argument, because African cultures in their great majority are agraphic, so they don't have any written language. All they have is oral tradition, and that's how myths and epopeas and everything on goes on. So it is very likely that at some point in history, some kind of primeval, as an anthropologist, I'm very skeptic about those things, but it is very possible that some kind of life-affirming Fang tradition got twisted with the slave trade. We know that there were Fang villages that were selling their own people to protect themselves. You know, they were selling youngsters, and so gerontocrats, elderly men in power, chiefs, were selling youths, young men, to the slavers just so that they could avoid potential rebellions at home. You know what I mean? So there is a point in saying that what we know that they understand as tradition might not really be tradition, but then again, there is no such thing, because there is nothing to go back to. The only thing they have is this fake memory of what Fang tradition means, and it's all about witchcraft and all about occult power orders. So that being said, it is hard to say that they become indoctrinated as much as they become incultured or acculturalized, because this is endemic. Buti, as a religion, coexists with Christianity. People whom are Buti practitioners go to the Buti Mass on a Saturday evening, and then go to the Catholic Mass on a Sunday morning. And that is a way, I believe, I don't know, in which the post-colonial mind, which is supposed to be bifurcated in these two worlds, tradition and modernity and so on, express and coexists. So there is no conflict for these people. witchcraft and buti coexist with Christianity and Catholicism and whatnot. And so it's hard to say that people become indoctrinated as much as they become acculturalized. This is part of the culture. It's not an ideology. Yes, so very briefly closing on that. I'm sorry, I'm like all teachers here. Once I get a microphone and an audience, I just enjoy myself. Is it possible to break the chain? I hope so. I'm trying to contribute to breaking the chain because Equatoguineans have always been a very hermetic culture, hermetic society, not culture, society, because of the totalitarian nature of the state. And they live always of appearances. They want to project an image of development and peace and so on and so forth, because also the regime legitimizes itself on these narratives. So what I'm trying to do with this kind of work is basically hold a mirror onto them, so that maybe when they see and recognize themselves in the way in which other people sees them, and in trying to understand them, not to judge them, understand them, hopefully they're going to stop being annulled persons. Yes?
Okay, so to give time to the other I'll give to the others to ask another question. Yes.
Yes, ma'am, it was really fantastic, so to say.
Thank you.
It opened my eyes where I could only hear that a few of my friends are in Morocco, in Cameroon, Sudan, and I have been with a few of my classmates also from Ethiopia. I did not get much sharings with them, but I would like to ask from you, since you are already pragmatically being there and you have touched the lives, and I have noted few things because I am from Ri Bhoi, from this particular place, from hardly 30 kilometers away to my home. I see that I come from the family where my four great grandparents were doing this type of witchcraft. So I see that envy, witchcraft, animism. I think you all guys from Ri Bhoi and from Meghalaya, I think you agree with me. Pikongunam ba hakari tungiro ni ngidon gum kene kitingsingo. Dainam. But ngilero dainam. I'm sorry because I communicate the local dialect, okay? The same thing what I have spoken, but I would like to ask this question. My friend told me that if I were to be like in Morocco or in Uganda, if I have to go to somebody's house, his sister has to sleep with me. Is it as a kind of a gift that they show that a kind of hospitality? Is it true or not?
In the Fang, is not the sister, is one of their wives, because they are polygynists.
Okay, so that is already cleared.
And I have to comment on that. A Fang polygynist man, when there comes a stranger into the village, he offers, as a sign of hospitality, one of his wives to the man to sleep with him, but also so that the wife can spy on the stranger.
Okay. And then one more thing. What I see is that our Bhoi people or the Khasi people out here, they have one kind of practice, the witchcraft, where they, suppose if I like you, don't mind me.
I'm married.
I will ask the
My
witchcraft.
husband's watching.
Yeah. No, I just say as an example. You see, I will ask the witchcraft practitioner and the best that has got more power. He will just say hi to you, or he will apply something on your hand. I think that's all. You will just follow. So I think in the African traditions and the way they have practiced, it is entirely different. But come to our context here. I think our people, it is an eye-opening to all of them to see here. But we should not forget that, as you said, some of them are already Christians. Now we have thrown it away, so to say. We are no longer practicing all these things. We have thrown it away. And I would like to ask a question to you. If those people who have been doing so far like that, now if they want to stop, to leave whatever political power or changes they want to make it, are they able to do it or not? Thank you.
Good question. In principle, yes. They should be able to do it, yes. But it depends also how deep you have gotten. And by how deep, I mean how high. Because once you reach a certain status, there becomes a point in which you are seen as already part of the system. And instead of losing you, what they are going to do is get rid of you. For some cases. Other people who might not be as deep, meaning as high, they might be able to get out, but they know, and this is a reason why they usually don't try to get out. They know that getting out would mean giving up on everything they have. Giving up on their capitals they might have built, houses, riches, a certain lifestyle, cars. Once you want to get out of all these things, you can, but you leave empty-handed, and a lot of people are not willing to pay that price. So they could, in theory, and many do. They go to Spain as exiles and they stay there and establish themselves and try to do something else, maybe human rights advocacy or whatnot. So in principle it's possible, but it's very hard because of everything that a person would have to give up.
Thank you for your mesmerizing presentation. I have a question to you and a connection that I'm trying to make through that question. So when you talk about this extraordinarily picturesque and almost like, you can see the things of cannibalism as an extreme and unthinkable form of violence, yes, utilized by the powerful to kind of dominate through the tools of fear and misinformation, possibly, a range of misinformations. I'm asking whether there is a kind of a common kind of a method to study such violences which go to the extreme, not maybe eating another human being, but killing a human being in different manners, and believing that killing a human being is politically or religiously right. So that in that using of belief and fear and normalizing of a culture of hate along with culture of envy. Yeah. What do you have to say in that? I mean, do you think hate and envy go together, can go together?
Can go together, and they very often go together, but they need a very specific petri dish to grow the way they have grown in Equatorial Guinea. And the petri dish, the Equatorial petri dish, is very peculiar. It goes all the way from the Fang majority, their religious life world, the Evu, all the way through anti-colonial movements such as the Booty, which is as what it started, all the way up to today, a totalitarian state. So it's a very specific trajectory in which people have never really had the chance to become a community, I believe. I believe that if envy and fear and mistrust are endemic, it's because the basic bonds of trust that are required to live in a society are missing in that place. President Messia's culture of denunciation was a massive booster for this thwarting of social life and community making. And with regards to whether there is a method to study extreme forms of violence, well, you need lots of guts. Pun not intended. You need lots of guts because they are hard topics. And during the time that I was writing my dissertation, as I mentioned, an entire chapter of this is dedicated to the concept of evil and how people conceptualize it there. When I was writing that chapter, I became psychologically unwell, trying to make sense of so much senseless suffering, meaningless suffering. For what? Because Fang men are greedy? Because they are corrupt? They kill and mutilate children? I got very psychologically unwell when I was writing that chapter, but also as more and more cases start to come up, I think I have taken certain objective distance. I have become desensitized, and so the methods are regular ethnographic methods. You follow what people say, you try to track sources, you try to collect as much material as possible, you analyze, you try to put context and history and ideology and politics and all folk together in order to make sense of these types of violence. So I think there is an anthropology of violence, an anthropology, for example, of genocides and so on, but this is not the case per se. So it's a bit different. And I also have a background in social psychology, which I believe helps a little bit trying to understand how the collective imagination works and expresses itself. So no real method, just creatively assembling methods and materials in order to make sense of something that in principle makes no sense whatsoever.
Hello. Thank you for this thrilling presentation. All the time while I was listening to you, this thing was striking in my mind, actually. Devoid of this totalitarian political influence, which is creating paranoid subjectivity or a kind of schizophrenic subjectivity, can we think of a pure kind of ethnic subjectivity? As an anthropology, apological point of view, as an anthropologist, what do you think about that? Or will it be like a too big romanticized idea?
Well, it's a very interesting question. Thank you. I think that when we think about ethnicity, we think about community. Am I right? Yes. When we think about ethnicity, we think ethnic groups, we think identity, and we think community. So to me, ethnicity is intrinsically tied to communitarianism. And communitarianism has its very big strengths and its very big weaknesses. Its strengths are, of course, networks of mutual support and community making and life-affirming practices, right? There's security, there's safety in the community, in principle. But then communitarianism also has its downsides, which is in order to keep the community together, you need a normative set of values and norms that cannot be faulted. Because whoever decides out of pure individual will that they don't want to do something that is expected from them normatively in their capacity as boyfriends, girlfriends, husbands, wives, if you start having these types of anomalies, then the whole communitarian system crumbles. Or so the belief goes, that if we start having anomalies in the system, then the system will fall apart. So communitarianism depends to a great extent on homogeneity, uniformity, and cohesion. And it's very hard to exert individuality and free will, individual will, in such normative communitarian parameters. The problem with communitarianism is also that it implies a notion of the person that is built on the fulfillment of roles and obligations. In communitarian settings, if you don't fulfill norms and obligations associated with your standing, be woman, man, whatever, then you're not a person. You lose your status as a person in communitarian systems. I'm talking like theory. But so, when you ask me whether there is or one can speak about a pure ethnic subjectivity, I think that it is possible, but only insofar as it implies, on the one hand, life-affirming values, which is not the case here, and also insofar as it makes provisions for anomalies, meaning minorities within the community, any kind. So life affirmation and tolerance and community provision for anomalous persons, I think then we could talk about some kind of, if not pure in the sense of primeval, primordial, primal, because that can never be really known. If not in that sense, at least in the sense of life-affirming ethnic values and community practices that can bring about development, which is not the case there. Have I answered the question?
Yeah, satisfied.
Thank you.
I think that it's not possible actually, but I just wanted to know whether we can think of actually.
Yes. Yeah. Thank you. One more. Anyone else? Last chance.
So just a quick question. This is a fascinating talk. And so I'm curious, you had mentioned at the very beginning and throughout that many anthropologists are reluctant to get into this. So when you talk to your colleagues, what are the conversations around this practice? Because I'm assuming, and correct me if I'm wrong, the fear is, I mean, outside of career, etc., is that this is going to open up the cultural justification to come in and practice imperialism. So like if the United States sees oil interests, right, and the government decides not to play with the United States, then they can use this knowledge, right, to justify coming in. So, or is it something else that is being discussed with you and your colleagues? Thank you.
Thank you for the question. The only people who actively, I cannot say that they engage with the question, but who have commented upon the question are Spanish anthropologists. And not anthropologists, yes, but mostly historians, Spanish historians. There is a very weird marriage there between history and anthropology in Spanish academia when it comes to Equatorial Guinea, because they are the ex-colonizers. And for a very long time, they have had the monopoly of research on the country. But they have always done so from the, through the colonial eye. Everything is about ethnicity. When I started studying Equatorial Guinea in 2012, there was nothing written about civil society as such, in urban settings, multi-ethnic environments, nothing. Everything was about ethnic culture and ethnic practice as supposedly have been existing for hundreds of years. So there is this weird marriage there between anthropology and history. So the comments they make, or the dominant narrative right now among them, is that the trope, that cannibalism is a trope, first of all. It's a trope. And it's a trope that has been created, kind of constructed by colonialists, be it missionaries or officials or European explorers, sort of adventurers. That this is a trope that has been invented, created by them. The adventurers who publish books in order to sell more books out of, the savage, wild, black cannibals, and the missionaries in order to justify evangelization and so on. So this is the narrative they have, and they say that no, of course the Fang have never been cannibals. It was all a colonial invention, and this kind of revisionist cannibalism, they're cannibalism deniers, I call them. I find it really counterproductive, because in an effort, and this is very important, I cannot stress this enough, in an effort to try to redeem the Black Fang savage by saying that he was never a cannibal, They are denying, disavowing, and ignoring everything that Equato-Guineans are saying right now about it. So there is this double standard at play in academic discourse on this subject. On the one hand, they want to redeem the pre-colonial subject, and by the same move, they are completely obliterating the objectivity and experience of Equato-Guineans who live today. So instead of, by trying to dismount the trope of the savage cannibal, they are creating the trope of the black African who speaks nonsense, which I believe is not very ethical and not very scientific either. I don't know if I have answered your question. Yes, thank you.
Anyone else who wants to make a last comment? Don't hold yourself, please speak up. Anyone?
Anyone, last chance.
Okay, I think no one now.
No one.
So we'll just conclude this session. Oh yeah, one, please, yeah.
Thank you, Doctor, for that presentation. I just wanted to ask you this question. You've talked about the discovery of oil, and with those two prominent leaders of Equatorial Guinea coming into the picture, these rituals coming up and the religious aspect of this whole region. Could all of this have been prevented? And if so, how?
The toughest question of all. I honestly think that it could have been prevented if Spain had not been Spain. Because the political culture that Equatorial Guinea inherited was Francoism from Spain. Spain was already a totalitarian traditionalist dictatorship when they colonized Equatorial Guinea. So the whole political culture and the way in which, if there were pre-existing oppressive ethnic traditional orders like polygyny among the Fang and so on and so forth, if there were already those orders there, perhaps if they had been colonized by, I don't know, Britain, things might have looked differently. Or if they had not been colonized at all, they might have looked different. The problem was that these orders were already there, and then when Spanish traditionalist totalitarianism superimposes itself on those orders, it doesn't destroy them, it just reaffirms them in a shadow way. So that's why the post-colonial state in Equatorial Guinea, okay, is bifurcated like all post-colonial states, but more than bifurcated is there's a shadow state. You have the institutions, you have the government, you have everything, and then you have the shadow state where the Fang rule according to ethnic Fang occult powers and according to ethnic Fang male patriarchal oppressive orders who went anywhere with colonization. So yes, I believe things could have been different if Spain had not been Spain. Thank you.
So we call it a day. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
I think that was one of our best moment in this conference. We're going to have another keynote tomorrow morning. Don't think that that's going to be any less than this, okay? And this is just a beginning. I think from Ri Bhoi, we can start a new academic journey altogether. And we profusely thank Adelaida for taking entire trouble to come down from Sweden to this place, you know. And she has some health issues. In spite of all that, she sort of took this venture on herself to come down here, even without knowing the place very well. But thank you very much for once again illuminating us by generating a new trail of thought in us, by making us alert to certain possibilities, which is absolutely needed in social sciences. I think with these words, we'll break for tea and reassemble there. We have one session to go probably. Okay, thanks for now. Yeah.